Welcome to Preptober! I am going to go ahead and quickly explain what NaNoWriMo and Preptober are for those who are unaware. If you are here for Preptober content and you're already aware of all these things, you can go ahead and skip. I'll put it somewhere on the screen where I start talking about specifically Preptober stuff. So, NaNoWriMo, which stands for National Novel Writing Month, is essentially a US nonprofit that holds a competition every year during the month of November. Their goal is to inspire creative writing by challenging writers to write a 50,000-word novel in 30 days. Essentially, Preptober is that little period before November where you make sure that you have everything prepared so that when November hits, you can just write. Last year, I was less prepared. It was my first ever NaNoWriMo, so I wasn't really familiar with what Preptober did and how important it was. But today I am going to be walking you through the steps of Preptober, how to get yourself ready, and you and I are going to be planning my novel together. So the first step is to make an account on NaNoWriMo. As you can see, I've already made my account. This is from last year, and you can see that I wrote 50,034 out of 50,000 words. You can also see what genre it was. I wrote a young adult fantasy. It was not very good, I'll be honest. The point of NaNoWriMo is not to complete the next big masterpiece, so it's not a big deal that I don't think it's very good, because realistically, your first novel will not be very good. So the URL is just nanowrimo.org. If you just put in NaNoWriMo, you will get a result. Make an account with them and it starts you on the right path. So, NaNoWriMo has a bunch of challenge badges. So these are the ones I completed. Update your writing progress, update more than once in one day, start a streak, 5,000, 10,000, 25,000, 40,000, and a completed novel. You might notice this badge here. It is oddly specific. 1,667 words. What does that mean? Essentially, when you break it down, in order to hit 50,000 words in 30 days, you have to write at least 1,667 words a day. So these blue bars here are my personal progress. The gray bar is where I should have been in order to hit my goal the right way. The reason I say the right way is because the way that I hit my goal was not sustainable. Writing 30,000 words in 5 days to hit my goal was not the way that you should be doing it. If it's how it got done, so be it. I did it, you might have to do it, it's whatever. But you can see the massive jump here. By like middle of the month, I was off by like 20,000 words. So you can see there are all sorts of things that you can do. And at the very top, it tells you exactly when NaNoWriMo is starting, which as of right now, when I am recording this, it is 3 days, 8 hours, 52 minutes, and 12 seconds, 11 seconds, 10 seconds. Down here, you see where it says start new project or set new goal for existing project. I am going to start a new project. And this is where you are prompted to start your new challenge. So, title of your project, personal challenge, give your personal challenge a name. What is your word count goal? What's your start date? What's your last day of writing? What is the title of my new project? Last year I called it NaNoWriMo 2022. This year, you guessed it, NaNoWriMo 2023. Because I'm creative. My word goal is going to be 50,000. And there we go. I have officially NaNoWriMo 2023. Quinn's Writing Challenge. I have written 0 out of 50,000 words because it is not November and I'm not starting until November 1st. Also, it feels important to mention at this point, I keep saying that the goal is 50,000 words. That was just my personal goal for last year. It doesn't have to be 50,000. It can be whatever goal you set for yourself, but 50,000 is like the standard for writing a novel. You can write a novella, which is anywhere from like 20 to 25,000, but I do believe at the 50,000 point is when it officially becomes a novel. So if you want to write a novel, you have to write at least 50. There's also novelettes, which are like anything less than 10,000 words. So it's all negotiable depending on how much you want to write in a month, and do you want to write a novel, a novella, or a novelette, and that will kind of set your goal for you. Okay, so now that I have set up this NaNoWriMo, if I go to the little cog on the top right, it gives me a whole bunch of options. So this is where you can change the name, what your project status is, how much privacy you want, what type of novel it is. So there's short stories, memoir, script, nonfiction, poetry, or something else. Like, it's whatever you want to do. I personally am writing a novel, so when I talk, it's going to be in relation to novels. Then it asks you what the genres are, a project summary, an excerpt, and then this is where it gets kind of fun for me. You have an option to add a Pinterest link or add a playlist link. And that way, people can view the Pinterest and view like the visual board of what you're working on, and they can also see what kind of music you relate to the book you're writing, which is so cool to me. I personally have a reading playlist. Some people can't do it, but I love listening to music while I'm reading a book. But if you are just setting up your account, you probably don't know what your genre is. You probably don't have a project summary, or you definitely don't have an excerpt from your novel because you haven't written it yet. So these are all things that you can change and add as you're creating your story. Some of these can be outlined in your prepping stage once you've completed that, but until you actually start writing, there are a couple things that you can't really do yet. Alright, so now that you know how NaNoWriMo works, we need to start prepping our novel. I prefer to do all my prepping in a Google Doc. I know people who prefer things like Notion. You can do whatever you'd like, but I am going to show you how I am prepping for my novel this year to potentially help you. Okay, so to me, the most important things when I am planning a novel are the genre, the characters, the general plot, the plot points, and the ending. Now, I am in no way a professional. I have written a novel one time. However, I have learned from my mistakes of last year, and I have given myself a more comprehensive plan to make sure that I can complete NaNoWriMo in a timely manner. So I'm going to be going over each point, why they're important to me, and what I will be including under these subcategories. Number 1. The genre. Genre is important to me because it sets the tone for your novel. Genre is so important. Books are categorized by genre. It is so important to make sure that when you are planning your novel, you know what the genre is, the language that you're going to be using, and who your audience is. Because to me, there is nothing worse than a high fantasy novel written like the characters are from the 21st century. So, in genre, you are going to be including the general genre. I'm talking, is it fantasy? Is it romance? Is it just literary fiction? Next, an important part is audience. Are you writing teen? Are you writing new adult? Are you writing adult? Are you writing for kids? You need to have a general idea of who your audience is. Last year, because my teacher had to read it, I wrote a teen fantasy with very little romance in it. So, just to categorize for you, kids is like 6 to 12. That is your kids range. In the teen realm, that's where it gets a little iffy. I would say 13 to 17 is your kids range. New adult is 18 to 21. And I know that's oddly specific, but I learned when I was reading Fourth Wing that Fourth Wing was designed for new adult. And new adult is 18 to 21, in that range. It's not too hard, the linguistics aren't too hard to understand, it's not so heavy, it's adult, there's adult content, but it's light. Adult is when you get into that heavy range. It's anywhere from like 20s and up. That's when you get into like the heavier stuff. To me, adult is like heavier on the subject matter, heavier on the language choices. I think knowing your audience helps write your story, because if you know who you're writing for, you know your language that you're going to be using, you know your subject matter, and it kind of helps narrow down your vision. Now, this part of it is similar to audience, but I'm going to say language is very important. We're talking things like swearing, subject matter, trigger warnings, etc. Language and audience intertwine a lot. You can't have one without the other. Depending on your audience, you're going to have different language choices. Depending on your language choices, you're going to have a different audience. So these two things are easy to decide together. I think it's easier to just find your audience and then you'll know what language you're going to use. There is some overlap, sure, there's some swearing in a teen book, but I think what I mean is more how often is cursing happening, how dark is the subject matter, are you putting trigger warnings on the front of your book? Next, we are talking about characters. These are your people. These are the people who are going to drive your story. So you need to make sure when coming up with your characters that you have a very set idea of who they are, what they lack, what they're going to gain from your story, and what they look like. Let's start with the easy things. First things you're going to come up with is how many characters. How many people are in your story? How many central people are in your story? You don't need to describe every single person who's gonna be in your story. If you're writing a fantasy, you don't need to have an ample description list for the guard when the main character passes through a gate. If you're writing just like a rom-com, you don't need to have a character description for the customer who comes into the cafe you're at. You just need to have a general idea of who your main characters are and how many of them. Next easiest thing is character description. Character description is easy. I'm not talking about trials and tribulations just yet. We don't need to get there. We are very surface level. I'm talking name. I'm talking height. I'm talking general looks. Describe your characters. Figure out who they are, give them a name, give them a face shape, give them a hair color, give them some height, you know? You should be able to have a clear picture in your head of what your characters look like when you're writing your story. For each character, you need personality descriptions. Personality descriptions are, who are your characters? Is your main guy, is he one of those I don't care, put the sunglasses down kind of dude? Or is he an open sweetheart who just wants to help the world and falls in love with the pretty girl over there? Like, who are your people, man? You should be able to know stylistically who your people are. That's essentially what it is. That is surface level though. Once you have finished figuring out basic personality stuff, then we get to the more story aspect of it. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is on this planet 100% the most flawless human being. So your characters should reflect that. I have read a number of stories where their main character is just the most perfect individual and you just get bored, right? You're like, oh my gosh, have an issue, please. Like, you need to make sure that your characters are not what we call Mary Sues. Basic human flaws is what makes us as people. If you have done any basic research into how to write a good story, there is a lot of talk of the who, want, need, do the action, get the thing, whatever. I think that's very important. Your character should go into the story lacking something. They should go into the story wanting something. They should go into the story needing something. There is a difference between want and need. Normally, they tie together very nicely, but your want and your need are two very different things. I read somewhere that it was like, sure, your character wants to be needed by someone, but what they need is non-judgmental love. Those are two things that are related but are not the same, a want versus a need. For each character that you have, they should have a driving motivation. What is motivating them? What is putting them in this story? I will be honest, this looks a little different depending on what genre you're writing for. Your driving motivation in a fantasy is not going to be the same as your driving motivation in a rom-com. One might be a little deeper than the other, you know? Like, a driving motivation in a fantasy is, this person killed all my parents, I need revenge. A driving motivation in a rom-com might be, I don't want to go to this wedding alone, I need a date. Like, they're different, right? But that doesn't mean that they're any less important to the story. Each of your characters should have some flaws that they are going to work on and fix by the end of the story. You also should have an idea as to how they are going to go about that. How are they going to fix this need or this want, you know? In the fantasy, they're going on a major quest and bringing 3 of their friends to come kill the bad guy. In the rom-com, he's just gonna hit up his brother's best friend. Like, it just, there's, you get what I'm saying, though. You understand what I'm saying. I don't need to explain this anymore, you get what I'm saying. I'm just coming up with funny scenarios. The last biggest thing is growth. How are they going to grow? What is going to make them grow as a character? What are they going to do, fix? What is the before and after, essentially? You don't have to have it all plotted out right away. That's for the plot section. But you should have a general idea of how they started versus how they ended. Now, the general plot. I think it is very important to distinguish between general plot and plot points. In the general plot section, all we're gonna do is word vomit. That's my favorite part, is I just get to write. This is the character, this is the other character, they're on a quest to do this, we're gonna do this, this is how they get here. Here are some plot points that I would like to incorporate. Here's how it ends. Bam, done. I love word vomit. The general plot is not for breaking down every single thing that happens point by point. That's where plot points comes in. General plot is just your idea, essentially. It's like what you read on the back of the book. It doesn't have to be formatted a specific way. I just think you write down the ideas that stick. In the general plot, you're gonna write down how it starts, what the climax is, and how it ends. Don't worry about that stuff in the middle. We don't gotta worry about that yet. You should just be writing down the big things. The big screaming, flashing, these are the cool parts of the story I want to emphasize. That's where all the fun stuff is. The general plot is my favorite part of writing a novel. I love being able to just word vomit my idea, write down all the cool stuff I have planned, and put it all in one place so that I can look at it and be like, yes, this is gonna be great. Now, with all the fun we've had with the general plot points is where all that fun goes to die. Don't get me wrong, I love writing plots. I love being able to space everything out, but I find it's the most taxing part of planning out your novel. Plot points is where you write every single detail. I'm talking from chapter to chapter, the entire story. Remember that middle bit we weren't talking about? You have to plan that out now. There is nothing worse than sitting down to write your novel on November 8th and having no idea where your story's going. This is how you prep. Plot points is the most prepping part of this entire thing. Everything should be written down, step by step by step. This is like the spark notes of your novel. You know, if people don't want to read the whole thing and they just want to get their essay done for their English teacher, they come and they read this. Someone should be able to look at your plot points and know exactly how your story starts, middle, end, and all the details in between. Your entire novel is here in point form. This is where you decide all those things that you wrote in your general plot and your character defects and all the things that you have written. This is where you decide how they fit in and how they're going to come together to make a cohesive story. This is why you prep your novel in October, because it requires a lot of brainstorming to get to this point. It might take multiple days of you sitting down and writing down little parts of your story until they all come together, and that is okay. This is the hardest part. This is where the fun goes to die, and more often than not, this is where people give up. The genre and the characters and the general plot are all the fun part. This is where you just get all that creativity out. The plot points are really where you have to sit down and crack down. And this is where a lot of people go, oh, this is harder than I thought, and they give up. My advice to you is take all the time you need. Finally, the ending. If by this point you have already written it out in your general plot, plotted it out point by point in your plot points, why is the ending a section that I think is necessary? This is where you're going to write the ending. And what I mean by that is that I actually want you to sit down and write the chapter that ends the novel. Why am I asking you to do this? The reason I'm saying that this is so important and why I think you should do this is because it really solidifies your idea. You know what? Things are always subject to change. And you might change things in your novel that change the ending. But by writing it out, it gives you an idea of how you want it all to come together to look back on later. This is where you become detailed. By writing your ending, you should be able to answer these 3 questions. How do all the points that you've mentioned before come together? How do all those character defects and plot things that you're excited about and the central storyline, how does it all funnel into the ending? How does it all pan out for your characters? Have they learned the thing they needed to learn? Have they gotten their want and their need? Have they gotten those things? The only reason your characters should not have gotten their wants or needs has to do with question number 3. Are you setting up for a second book? If you plan on actually writing a trilogy, I think this is a great idea. I think you don't necessarily have to have a cohesive ending for your book if you're planning on a book 2. However, if you do not plan on having a book 2, writing it as if there is going to be a book 2 to cop yourself out of answering these questions isn't the route that I would personally go. If you're writing a book 2, great. You don't necessarily have to answer the second question. That will be answered in your second book, which you will write. But, like most of us, if you are writing NaNoWriMo just to complete a novel and to write a book, and not necessarily to open the floodgates of a series or a trilogy, you should be able to answer all 3 of these questions. Tie up all your loose ends, you know? This is the section where you tie it all up. How did they get their wants and their needs? Did they get their wants or their needs? They should have. if you are not writing a book 2. If you're not writing a book 2, you're going to have a different ending than someone who is writing a second book. There's this nice, like, toe the line that authors like to do where they could be setting up for a book 2, or they could just leave it at 1. Personally, I don't like to make a definitive decision of, yes, I'm setting up for a book 2, or no, this is a standalone. I like this thing that authors tend to do, which is like this toe the line middle ground. And that is why I think the ending is so important. The ending is one of the most important parts of a novel, obviously. Beginning, climax, ending. Those are the ones you want to focus on, but I think the ending is possibly the most important part because you do not want to be dissatisfied with your ending. You do not want your readers or anyone who happens to read your ending to be, you know, underwhelmed. And essentially, this is Preptober. These are the things you should be focusing on when you're prepping your novel to make sure that when NaNoWriMo comes around, you are prepared. So now that I've shown you what NaNoWriMo looks like, how to use the website and what you can do with it, and I've shown you exactly what I'm going to be using to prep my novel and how I'm going to be writing everything out, I hope that now you are able to do something similar. Now I'm able to go prep my novel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found any of the following tips helpful, and I hope that I've inspired you to potentially take on NaNoWriMo 2023. So if you enjoyed this Preptober video and you want to see how I do in NaNoWriMo this year, feel free to subscribe and give this video a like. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I hope I've inspired you. Have a good rest of your day. See you guys next week. Bye!